In a Salford pub frequented by gangsters, enforcers and thugs, a brutal yet bizarre turn of events would take place. Two hitmen, looking to exact revenge for their boss, would enter guns drawn in an attempt to assassinate a rival. But things would quickly take a turn for the worse for the would-be assassins, and after the hail of bullets stopped and the smoke had cleared, the two young men were the only ones lying dead. This is the story of the brass handles hit that went wrong, and in this video we're going to delve into the circumstances surrounding the case, the outcome and the aftermath. Now let's get ready, because it's time for more true crime. It was a peaceful Sunday afternoon in Salford, Greater Manchester. Inside a local pub called the Brass Handles, families and friends were gathered to watch a Manchester United football match on TV. Kids were running around, pints were being poured, and the crowd were cheering on their team. It was an ordinary weekend scene. But outside, two young men in balaclavas were approaching with loaded handguns. In minutes, the pub would become the site of a bloody gangland drama that no one could have imagined. Just after 2:20 p.m. on March 12, 2006, the pub's doors flew open. The two masked figures, 19-year-old Richard Donny Austin and 20-year-old Carlton Alvaranga, stormed into the Brass Handles. Without a word, they raised their guns and opened fire. Bullets blasted into the woodwork. Patrons dove for cover under pool tables. Austin's 9mm pistol bucked in his hand as he fired shot after shot at one man in particular, David Totten, a local up-and-coming hardman and enforcer who had been relaxing with a beer moments before. Totten screams out as he is hit. A burst of pain surged through him as a bullet tears into his face. His friend, Aaron Travers, was also struck, collapsing as chaos erupted around them. In total, Austin squeezed the trigger about 6 times, shooting both Totten and Travers multiple times. Screams echoed out, and glasses were knocked over in panic. Meanwhile, Carlton Alvaranga aimed at the same table and tried to fire, but his gun jammed. In that split second, the entire plan started to unravel. Some pub regulars, realising the attackers were momentarily vulnerable, decided to fight back. They rushed the gunmen with astonishing bravery, or desperation. Within seconds, Alvaranga and Austin were tackled to the floor. A struggle ensued, chairs toppled over and multiple fists being swung. The stunned hitmen were quickly disarmed. One hero wrestled away Alvaranga's handgun. Another snatched Austin's weapon as he was subdued. What was supposed to be a cold-blooded execution had flipped on its head. Now the hunters had become the prey. Seeing their mission collapse, the two young gunmen stumbled out of the pub and ran for their lives. Bleeding from the scuffle, they sprinted across a grassy field outside, desperate to reach a getaway car parked nearby on Highfield Road. But they didn't make it that far. Suddenly a figure emerged behind them, a local man who had been in the pub, known on the streets as a hardened gangster from Moss Side. He had one of the hitmen's guns in his hand. Without hesitation, he raised it and opened fire on the fleeing assailants. Alvaranga was hit first. A bullet slammed into his back and he cried out, crumpling onto the grass. Austin, seeing this, turned his head for a fatal instant. The gunman took aim and shot Austin in the side, then walked up and put a final bullet in his head at point-blank range. It was an execution, delivered in front of a dozen onlookers, the very fate these two hired killers had intended for someone else just moments before. A tense silence fell after the gunshots ceased, the kind of eerie quiet that often follows sudden violence. In that pause, people peeked out from the pub's doorway, trembling, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Two bodies lay on the open ground as wisps of smoke rose from the hot gun barrels on the grass. But the frenzy wasn't over. A group of teenagers in hoodies who witnessed the scene from a nearby block of flats ran over. Fueled by adrenaline or rage, they began to kick and stomp on the downed gunmen. The teens' boots crashed down on the heads and bodies of Alvarenga and Austin repeatedly. It was a shocking burst of vigilante fury. These youths seemed intent on making sure the hitmen were well and truly dead. Within minutes, sirens pierced the air. Police cars and ambulances flooded Edge Hill Close. Paramedics rushed over to the two gunmen, but there was nothing that could be done. 19-year-old Austin and 20-year-old Alvarenga were almost dead from the gunshots and the beating they took. Within moments, they were pronounced dead at the scene, and their bodies covered with sheets on the little grassy verge across from the pub. Inside the brass handles, patrons of the pub were in shock. Many were crying and shaking from the close brush with death. David Totten was alive, incredibly, and despite being shot 3 times, including once in the face, he was in a serious but stable condition. His friend Aaron Travers was also badly hurt, with 5 gunshot wounds, but he too would survive. Both men were rushed to the hospital and received emergency medical treatment that miraculously saved their lives. By that evening, the crime scene was swarming with detectives and forensic teams. The Brass Handles pub was taped off and the area placed under heavy police presence. Investigators started knocking on doors, trying to find witnesses, but they were met with a wall of silence. Astonishingly, though the pub had been packed, no one claimed to have seen anything useful. It was soon clear that this was a gang-related incident, and locals were either too afraid or too tied to the streets to talk. To make matters worse, when police tried to locate the pub's CCTV footage, they discovered the entire security system had been sabotaged. The hard drive had been wiped clean right after the shooting. Someone on the inside clearly acted fast to destroy the evidence. It was a huge setback for the investigation. However, some facts were obvious from the get-go. The dead assailants carried fake IDs, but within a day, police uncovered their real identities. Richard Austin and Carlton Alvarenga, 2 young men from Manchester's notorious Moss Side neighbourhood, both had links to gangs. In fact, they were connected to the Doddington gang, one of the outfits that earned the city the nickname Gunchester in the 90s. Neither man had a pristine past. One was awaiting trial for a crime, another had a theft charge. But nothing about them suggested they were major players. So why would they launch a brazen armed assault in Salford, a part of town they're not even from? The pieces slowly began to come together. They were hired guns. Detectives began to suspect that Austin and Alvarenga were paid hitmen sent to kill David Totten. Totten, the hard man who was their target, had a bit of a rough reputation himself, and it turned out he'd had a run-in with a known face not long before the attack. Word on the street was that Totten was denied entry to a club after claiming he was with a local gang boss called Bobby Spears, who was already inside the bar. When the gang leader was asked to vouch for Totten, he denied knowing him, embarrassing Totten completely. Totten, feeling let down and possibly seeking revenge, later began frequenting Spears' Salford local, the Brass Handles pub, in what was thought to be a plan to exact revenge upon him. Spears, feeling affronted that Totten was trying to embarrass him, vowed he'd sort out the issue on his own terms. This connection to Totten meant that Bobby Spears became target number 1 for the police investigation. As detectives dug further, an informant tip and cell phone records began pointing to a woman who was inside the pub that day acting suspiciously. Her name was Constance Howarth, known in local circles as the Black Widow. Constance was a 38-year-old from Salford with a history of gun running after she got caught transporting submachine guns for gangsters. Investigators learned that Howarth was indeed at the Brass Handles having a drink during the match. In reality, she was on her phone, quietly feeding information to someone as the events unfolded. The pieces started to click. Howarth was the inside spotter, the eyes for the hit team. She knew the pub layout and where Totten would be sitting, and she was there to point out the target and possibly report when to strike. As soon as the shooting started, she vanished, later claiming she hid in the ladies' room when the shooting began. But police weren't buying her story. Soon another name begins to surface, a man named Ian McLeod. He's 42 and not just any street thug. McLeod was a reputed gang leader in Manchester's underworld, one of the heads of the Doddington gang, the same group the two dead hitmen hailed from. McLeod's nickname alone instills fear. Police soon came to believe it was McLeod who recruited the two young gunmen for this job, and that he personally drove them to Salford that day. In fact, a witness account from the scene sticks out. Someone saw a man in a Ford Mondeo shout, "Is he dead?" and then run over to one of the fallen shooters before speeding off, with a description that fits McLeod to a T. It appeared that McLeod was the getaway driver and on-site supervisor, ready to extract his hitmen after they killed Totten. But when he realised his hired guns had themselves been shot, he ditched them and fled the scene. Within a few months, police had enough evidence to make arrests. In coordinated raids, they nabbed Constance Howarth and Ian McLeod and charged them in the conspiracy to murder Totten. Both protest their innocence. Howarth insists she was merely out for a drink and had nothing to do with any plot, while McLeod clams up and refuses to talk. But the digital trail told a different story. Phone records showed a lot of calls and texts linking McLeod, Howarth and a third key player in the hours around the shooting. That third player was, of course, Bobby Spears, the man with the bruised ego from the nightclub spat. Spears was a 41-year-old security firm boss from Prestwich, and behind a veneer of respectability, he was deeply enmeshed in organised crime. Investigators become convinced that Spears was the money man and mastermind who ordered the hit on Totten. The problem, however, was that they couldn't ask Spears any questions because he was nowhere to be found. It turned out that just days after the pub shooting, Spears fled the UK. He seemingly sensed the trail leading back to him and bolted to Spain to lay low. For a while, Spears remained an elusive phantom as the legal case moved forward without him. In March 2007, Ian McLeod and Constance Howarth went on trial in a Preston courthouse. Over several weeks, the story unfolded in court. How Spears lost face over a squabble with Totten. How he tapped McLeod, an old ally in the Manchester underworld, to take care of Totten. And how Howarth, the trusted local, agreed to help by being the spotter. Jurors heard how the two hitmen were recruited from Moss Side's gangs, barely out of their teens, likely forced into the scheme due to gang loyalty or for repayment of a debt, whilst their leader, Ian McLeod, was to receive a £10,000 payday to organise the hit. It's a story of gangland scheming, double crosses and fatal miscalculation. The outcome? McLeod and Howarth were both found guilty of conspiracy to murder Totten. The judge didn't hold back at sentencing. He tells them their actions led directly to two young men losing their lives, even if those men weren't innocent. McLeod, labelled an incorrigible gangland puppet master, was handed life in prison with a 21-year minimum sentence. Howarth, the Black Widow who cynically pointed out the target and then walked away, was given life with a 20-year minimum sentence. As they were led away to begin very long stays behind bars, the mastermind Spears was still out there, a ghost looming over the proceedings. The law wouldn't forget about Bobby Spears though. His day would come. In July 2008, over a year after his co-conspirator's conviction, Spears was tracked down in Benidorm, Spain. Acting on a tip and armed with a European arrest warrant, Spanish police swooped in and arrested Spears at a seaside apartment. The alleged puppet master of the brass handles hit was finally in custody. By August 2008, Spears was extradited back to Manchester to face the music. Fast forward to May 2009, it's Spears' turn in the dock at Manchester Crown Court. He's now 41 but looks older, maybe stress of life on the run. The prosecution lays out the case that Spears orchestrated the attempted assassination from afar. In a twist almost too absurd for fiction, Spears spent the day of the shooting watching Man United play at Old Trafford, thinking that being at a football match with dozens of witnesses would give him an ironclad alibi. Little did he know, the police would later pull his mobile phone records and find that he was busier texting than watching the game. They show that during the match, and especially around half-time when the attack at the pub occurred, Spears was sending a flurry of instructions to his accomplices, coordinating the hit in real time. It's a damning digital paper trail. Spears' trial is the final piece of this saga. Witnesses refuse to cooperate as before. Totten and Travers still keep silent, but by now the circumstantial and forensic evidence speaks loudly enough. The jury hears about the terrifying scene at the brass handles, the bullets flying in a bar full of families, the hired guns turning into victims, the blood on the grass outside. They hear how Spears fled the country immediately after, which in itself looks like consciousness of guilt. After 3 weeks of testimony and arguments, the verdict comes in: guilty. Spears is convicted of conspiracy to murder David Totten. In effect, he's being held accountable for setting in motion the chain of events that led to all the violence that day, including the death of the 2 young men he'd sent to do the job. The judge gives Spears a life sentence. He must serve at least 23 years before any chance of release. It's one of the longest minimum terms for a case of this kind, reflecting how seriously the court viewed this botched hit. The judge describes the plot as a professional gangland execution attempt carried out with total disregard for innocent bystanders. Indeed, it was sheer luck that more people weren't hurt or killed in that pub, a fact not lost on the community. With Spears now behind bars, the authorities have nailed all the primary architects of the brass handles crime. Ian McLeod, the gang captain who recruited the hitmen, is serving his life term. Constance Howarth, the inside spotter, is likewise in prison. Her attempts to appeal her conviction have failed, leaving her to serve out those 20 years. And Bobby Spears, the mastermind with the bruised ego, will not be walking free until at least the 2030s, if ever. And yet, for all those victories in court, one part of the story remains infuriatingly unresolved. Who actually shot the hitmen? The mystery gunman at the pub, the one who turned the hitmen's own weapons on them, was never officially identified. Unofficially, police strongly suspect it was a man named Marcus Rico Callahan, a member of the rival Gooch gang, who just happened to be in the pub that day. Perhaps, seeing an opportunity to eliminate 2 Doddington gang members on his turf, he allegedly took matters into his own hands. But the code of the street held firm. No witnesses came forward to point the finger at Callahan. In November 2009, police publicly announced they wanted to speak with Callahan in connection with the murders of Alvaranga and Austin. They even warned the public that he was dangerous, hoping someone might tip them off. But, to date, no one has been charged with the deaths of the 2 gunmen. It stands as a darkly ironic footnote. The only lives lost that day were those of the would-be assassins, and their killer walked away unidentified and unpunished. So there you have it, the story of the Salford hit that went wrong. And if you took something from this video, you might also enjoy the video on screen now, where I showcase 17 evil murderers who were jailed for the act of murder in September 2025. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one, when it'll once again be time for more true crime.